With precious time at stake in every pit stop and top teams capable of changing all four wheels in under 3 seconds, the potential for drama in the pits remains high. The following are 10 of the most memorable pit lane gaffes in Formula 1 history. Number 1. The 2007 Chinese Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton arrived at the 2007 Chinese Grand Prix round 16 of 17 that year as the overwhelming favourite for the title after a remarkable and at times tumultuous debut season. That is until a disastrous turn of events in Shanghai. Few accidents in F1 racing have carried so little energy and yet so much significance. Even fewer have seemed so preventable. The race started on a wet track and Hamilton sped away to the lead, on course for a victory that would give him the World Championship with 1 round to spare. However, as the track dried and his intermediate tyres began to show visible signs of wear, he and the team inexplicably delayed their pit stop for lap after lap. McLaren finally came in after he lost 7.7 seconds to his teammate in a single lap. Unbeknownst to Hamilton, the pit lane had not dried as quickly as the track. With no feel from the tyres that had been worn down to canvas in places, and a visor smeared by grime and grease thrown up by the conditions, he was unsighted. And as the pit lane curved left, he was caught out. His McLaren slid wide into the gravel, a crescendo of revs stifled by physics as his tyres sunk into the stones and his momentum dwindled. His car beached, his head in his hands, Hamilton was out. The damage had been done, and Hamilton's championship lead had been cut in half. He, Alonso and Raikkonen would go into the Brazilian Grand Prix separated by only 7 points. Raikkonen triumphed in Brazil, stealing the most unlikely of championship victories from Hamilton and Alonso. Only 1 point separated the 3 drivers, a sobering reminder of what could have been if not for the Shanghai gravel trap. Number 2. The 2008 Canadian Grand Prix. A completely insane race that saw the track breaking up over the course of the weekend, with repairs being made right up until the race's start. Mark Webber crashed out of qualifying due to the crumbling surface, which was compared to a motocross track. When a safety car was deployed for Adrian Sutil's ailing Force India, much of the field dived into the pits, with Kimi Raikkonen and Robert Kubica leapfrogging Hamilton in the process. Both drivers came to a halt at the end of the pit lane due to a red light, but Hamilton failed to see the signal and, swerving left to avoid the BMW, ploughed into Raikkonen's Ferrari, putting both drivers out of the race. Nico Rosberg was also caught up in the commotion after colliding with Hamilton, but he was able to continue. Kubica emerged unscathed and went on to win the race. Number 3. The 1994 German Grand Prix. When in-race refueling was reinstated in Formula 1 in 1994, the risks were well understood. Other series which permitted in-race refueling had experienced horrific fires, such as the 1981 Indianapolis 500 and the 1985 World Sports Car Championship race at Hockenheim. In an attempt to mitigate the risks, F1 refueling gigs were designed to prevent fuel from escaping once the nozzle was decoupled from the car. But such a failure saw Hockenheim witness another serious fire 9 years later, this time during the German Grand Prix. On lap 15, as Simon Morley removed the refueling nozzle from Jos Verstappen's Benetton B194, fuel sprayed all over the car, driver and several mechanics. It ignited and the car burst into flames. Although it was quickly extinguished, several mechanics were burned. Morley was the worst affected, as fuel sprayed inside his helmet before catching fire. Verstappen and 4 other members of the crew were also injured. Another person involved in the fire was Paul Seaby, who is still with the team, now Alpine, as their factory support manager and has a picture of himself engulfed in flames as a Twitter avatar. The FIA later claimed that Benetton had removed the filter from their rigs, allowing a foreign body to jam the fuel valve open. It was the latest in a string of controversies that plagued the team in 1994. Number 4. The 2011 Hungarian Grand Prix. Jerome D'Ambrosio was a rather anonymous presence around the paddock, but he will at least be remembered for his unprecedented pit lane spin at the Hungaroring in 2011. In qualifying, he finished last, having been beaten by both HRTs, but he was only 2/10ths slower than his teammate Glock, and he claimed to be close to the car's full potential. The pit lane had become slippery due to a mid-race shower, and as D'Ambrosio attempted to turn into his box, he lost control of the car, sending his team's mechanic fleeing as he spun towards the garages. Fortunately, the car came to a stop without colliding with anyone or anything, but the terrifying incident did little to endear D'Ambrosio to the team. At the end of the season, he was replaced by Charles Pic. D'Ambrosio admitted after the race that it was not his best showing. "I'm disappointed really, but the conditions were very tough out there. I had a very good start to the race and I was happy about that, but I made an error when the rain came, choosing to stop for intermediates when I probably should have stayed out on the slicks. So I lost a lot of time at the pit stops, and I also had a tough moment when I spun in the box when I came in. Although, thankfully the car didn't hit anyone. Number 5. The 1999 European Grand Prix. The Nürburgring weather ran true to form in 1999, with the occasional rain showers keeping drivers and teams on their toes. Eddie Irvine was on his way to the pits to switch to wet weather tyres on lap 22, when he radioed his team to request another set of dries. The befuddled Ferrari crew dashed back out of the pits with only 3 of the requested tyres. It seemed like an eternity before the missing right rear was discovered, and there was another delay while the crew determined whether it was the correct one. Irvine was stalled for nearly 48 seconds, his race ruined. Irvine's chances of salvaging something from the chaos were dashed when he went straight onto the chicane under pressure from his championship rival, Mika Häkkinen. Fortunately for Irvine, Häkkinen also made the wrong tyre choice and was unable to capitalise on the Ferrari antics. Number 6. 1989 and the 1991 Portuguese Grand Prix. When Jenson Button was sent from his pit box too soon during the 2013 Malaysian Grand Prix, he had the presence of mind to sit and wait for his mechanics to pull him back, instead of selecting reverse and doing it himself. If Nigel Mansell had done that in Portugal in 1989, he'd have saved himself a lot of bother. Instead, having overshot his pit stop at the Estoril track, he reversed back himself and was shown the black flag shortly afterwards. By now, Mansell was on Ayrton Senna's tail and poised to make a move for the lead. The Ferrari driver finally made his move at the first corner, where the two collided and spun off. He claimed he didn't see the black flag, and stewards disqualified him from the following race. 2 years later, Mansell's Portuguese pit woes resurfaced. His wheel came loose seconds after pitting this time, and his mechanics reattached it in the pit lane. This was against the rules, and he was disqualified once more. The Estoril circuit was a love-hate relationship for Mansell, despite the 2 dramas, the second of which ended his chances of winning the 1991 Drivers' Championships. He also claimed 3 wins at the Portuguese track. Number 7. The 2008 Singapore Grand Prix. One charge levelled against Ferrari in recent years is that it's lost its ability to innovate. They did, however, pioneer the development of pit stop traffic lights in the previous decade, which now must be used by all teams. The idea was that the lights would save tenths of a second for each stop their cars made. And to be fair, they usually did. But in the refueling era, disaster seemed unavoidable, and so it proved. Disaster struck at the inaugural Singapore Grand Prix when race leader Felipe Massa, pitting under the safety car following Nelson Piquet's infamous deliberate crash, was given a green light before the fuel hose had been disengaged. Massa drove away, ripping the hose from the garage and dragging it to the pit lane's far end. His mechanics eventually removed it and the Ferrari rejoined the race, but a potential 10 points had been lost and Massa's championship hopes had been severely harmed. Massa isn't the only driver who left the pits with the refueling hose still attached to his car. In the previous year, Christian Albers did the same at Magny Cours. In contrast to Massa's incident, this was largely Albers' fault, and he was fired after just one more race for the Spiker team. Number 8. The 2009 Brazilian Grand Prix. Kimi Raikkonen finished 6th in the 2009 Brazilian Grand Prix, but things could have gone much worse for the Finnish driver. During the first lap, Kimi tried to overtake Mark Webber on the outside and damaged his front wing in the process, having to visit the pits after the safety car was deployed. But the worst has yet to come. Fellow Finn Heikki Kovalainen also pitted early in the race, but like Massa the year before in Singapore, he was released before the pit crew had finished refueling and drove off down the pit lane with the hose still attached to the car. Kimi Raikkonen was close behind Kovalainen, who was doused in fuel spray from the severed hose. The fuel entered his helmet through an open visor, briefly blinding him and ignited on the hot bodywork of the Ferrari, momentarily engulfing the car in flames. Despite this, the Ferrari driver heroically fought his way back through the field. At the pit stop, I ended up with some drops of petrol in my eye from the fuel line stuck on Kovalainen's car, and then I was engulfed in flames and blinded. I was going to stop, but luckily the flames soon went out. Even now, my eyes are still burning, but I'm alright, said the Finnish driver after the race. Number 9. The 2010 Hungarian Grand Prix. Few races can compete with the 2010 Hungarian Grand Prix in terms of pit lane carnage. An early safety car sent the majority of the field scurrying into the pits at the same time, and in the ensuing frenzy, Robert Kubica was released from his pit stop directly into the path of Adrian Sutil, who was coming in for his. Meanwhile, Nico Rosberg's right rear wheel, which had been incorrectly fastened to his car, made a bid for freedom following his own stop. The wheel careered down the pit lane and straight towards the Williams pit crew, and although one mechanic was hit in the chest, he escaped serious injury. Sutil was forced to retire on the spot, Rosberg made it to the end of the pit lane before retiring, and Kubica made it only a few laps before he was forced to retire as well. It wouldn't be surprised if some of the fans referred to the Hungarian pit lane as cursed at the time, as only a year earlier Fernando Alonso had been sent from the pits with an improperly attached wheel, which then fell off. The stewards reacted by barring Renault from the next race, Alonso's home Grand Prix in Valencia, but the decision was later reversed. Number 10. The 2001 Malaysian Grand Prix. Ferrari legend Rubens Barrichello, who drove alongside Michael Schumacher to some of the team's most notable victories, had a disastrous pit stop at the 2001 Malaysian Grand Prix. In yet another rain-soaked race, the Brazilian and his German teammates were both called into the pits, one after the other, to switch to slicks as the track dried. Unfortunately for Barrichello, Ferrari's mechanics fumbled badly, searching for his tyres for over a minute in the pit lane. As a result, Barrichello dropped from 3rd to 11th on the grid. Although he recovered to finish 2nd behind his teammate, the race was a letdown for the Brazilian, who could have won the race if it hadn't been for the errant stop. He said after the race, "Michael is one hell of a driver, but I wish I had a little more luck like he had today, because when I went off, I picked up lots of stones, and he seemed to get away without any problem really, while I had to make an extra pit stop." So we've reached the end of our list. What are your thoughts on these pit stops going wrong? Would you like to hear more about the blunders made by teams and drivers in this crucial part of the race? Please leave your thoughts in the comments section below.